Hello, in this video, I want to continue the series that we started in the last one, talking a little bit about racial capitalism on the upcoming Lincoln Douglas topic for September and October on the World Trade Organization and intellectual property protections on medicine. In the last video, I did a little bit of intro work just talking about what I thought were some of the driving arguments for each of what I thought were like some of the core parts of the resolutions and the way that I thought they might function in the context of racial capitalism. And so for these next videos, if you've seen some of my other series, is kind of where I start breaking down the specifics of how I think these arguments will operate in different kind of like scenarios, and the way that I think that those scenarios can kind of like help you find the primary places and the parts of the argument that you really like in order for you to really create a strong framing for how you really want to use this argument against other teams. Or if you're looking to try to just get ahead and figure out how to answer what I think will be like some of the better arguments, I think that this will definitely be a place where you can definitely invest a lot of time in. So hopefully I think that this will be helpful, and I'll be able to kind of just start off thinking about what are some of the kind of the priorities when you're reading this type of argument versus a policy team on the upcoming LD resolution, and then what I think are some of the kind of concerns when you're thinking about how you kind of apply this advice to some of the more specific portions of the debate, whether it be the framing, the thesis, the link debate, the permutation, impact comparison, or alternative debating. And I think that just overall, hopefully, the discussion will really be able to be a helpful place for you to figure out what the best place to prioritize your time is for this type of argument on the resolution as a whole. I think that when I'm just thinking about racial capitalism on this resolution, I think that the places where I think that teams should spend the most time thinking about their time is how can you have really in-depth critiques of the type of advantages that people would want to read on this type of resolution, because I think that there will probably not be a large diversity of the type of I think that policy impacts that will be read against K teams. I think that most teams will probably either strive towards just kind of going for a small like medicine impact on the importance of like getting vaccines out to people, and some of like the WTO efforts towards like equal access to vaccines and equal information surrounding vaccines. But I also think that there is a lot of interesting debate to be had about like how intellectual property protections in the context of medicine relate to like ways that U.S. is able to dictate forms of like hegemony, and also the ways in which they're able to ensure like various types of like global economic favor for countries that are kind of like already experiencing like privilege in that context, and what that kind of does to kind of like cement both local disparities and global disparities. And I think that there are a lot of really interesting ways that you can kind of like take these fields and figure out how you want to package or link arguments. But I think first that it requires you to really have an in-depth link argument that or an in-depth framing argument that allows you to kind of like make the specifics of the plain text a little bit less relevant. I think that when you're on a topic like intellectual property protections, where the advantage field is really not as intuitive as it usually would be, or where the most like common advantages are usually read are like the economy advantage, the hedge advantage, or like a small kind of like soft left medicine advantage, the places that you want to look are really ways in which you can kind of critique the ways in which people get to those messages and the common method get to those advantages, and the common kind of avenues that people use in order to make those advantages purposeful. And I think the first place to kind of start that off with is like, how are you going to create an advantageous like framing and thesis for the debate that really hinges on why the particularities of the plan text don't matter, because the entire field of the resolution, like there's already something wrong with it in the way that the affirmative is kind of responding to it. And I think that starting your criticism from there can help you have like a really foundational structural critique of the affirmative that really helps you beat back against like a lot of the permutation ground that'll come in, and a lot of the ways that people I think try to focus or shift the actor away from particularly like the United States, for example. I think there are a lot of ways that people might try to play with some other global actors or other global impacts in terms of like the particular places in which they're focusing on. And I think that thinking about the ways in which you can have easy access to talking and contextualizing that to a larger disparity that is created by the resolution as a whole is a really interesting place for you to start this critique, and how I kind of want to frame the video for the portions of the debate that I kind of want to go through in each section of these videos. So kind of starting off with like the framing portion of the debate, I think that you really want to kind of start off with a framing for the resolution that is really about like why the kind of field of intellectual property protections is like already anti-black. I think that really starting with just like a place that really explains why the World Trade Organization, the way that countries and corporations are able to find their standing in them, is already created by their ability to expropriate and create disproportionate kind of like relationships to like resources that are already existent and probably should be equally accessed. And the way in which the kind of like international field that the resolution is already entering into is already predetermined by various types of histories of global dispossession to marginalized communities, whether that be the slave trade, whether that be like settler colonialism, or just like colonialism globally and imperialism globally. I think all are really good questions to kind of like start where you want to do to contextualize like how we kind of like enter the debate where we're entering at, because that gives the judge a kind of like prior importance to the context of the resolution. And then I think you want to make it an argument that's just like any investment in a world ordering that would kind of like allow this type of violence to continue or would create worse forms of this violence should be like a thing that we refuse. And I think that kind of like establishing that as the base value for how you want the judge to decide what type of political methodologies are good or bad is a really advantageous place to be in, because I think a lot of the arguments that you want to make from the framing argument is why the current world ordering in which we've done to like create kind of protections or create equal access to such things like medicine under the way in which we're like currently doing things is already not working because of the way in which dispossession is required in order for that to kind of be forwarded. And I think it allows you to kind of take that key thesis thing and apply it directly to the way in which you want the judge to apply that to how they should be evaluating the debate. And thus, even if you're not really winning a really strong alternative explanation at the end of the debate, your framing page for how the judge is able to decide a negative or affirmative ballot is already setting up the burden that you don't necessarily need to win the alternative is even better than the affirmative, just that it invests in a particularly different way of ordering or thinking through the world that could be better than the risk that we would take continuing that ordering under the affirmative. I think that then when you kind of like translate what some of that advice looks like for the thesis portion of the debate, a lot of it is really taking that kind of like broader contextualization we've done for like the resolution and put it contextually, not even to the context of the plan, but maybe even contextual to the specific advantages and the way that you see the affirmatives wanting to take the advantages throughout the debate. I think some of the core thesis work that you could be doing to defer this from like the common stuff that you would do at Racial Capitalism that I talked about in other videos is taking your thesis to do like really preemptive work, to being like, for instance, if you see a team reading a bigger like econ or hedge impact, making arguments about why the kind of like usage of the greater survivability of the population or general survivability are used as ways to create and justify other types of dispossession, and are basically able to justify the ways in which we expropriate resources from marginalized communities in the name of like a generalized like health or a generalized survival. And I think that starting your kind of thesis from that type of place where it is already like going directly in the place where the affirmative is going to be most comfortable and trying to unsettle their ability to make that type of argumentation comfortably can be a really good place to make it feel like you're having an app-specific debate, even if your thesis question isn't really starting off from the particularities of what the plan text does. And I think as you kind of like get more comfortable being able to discuss how the plan text particularly invests in these systems, you can kind of create a story from these things together that I think really set up a strong thesis that makes your link arguments that I'll kind of be talking about in the next video a lot more important. Hopefully this video is helpful for you, and hopefully you'll tune into more videos I'll be doing talking about racial capitalism on the World Trade Organization Intellectual Property Protections for Medicines topic for September and October for Lincoln Douglas. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.